Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Dan and welcome back for yet another video. In today's video, it's the Canon R5 Mark II review. I feel like I've used it enough now that I can actually review this camera. It's a beast, I'll tell you that right from the get-go, but we have a lot to discuss. Let's get started. Let's start with the build and ergonomics on this camera. The build quality is actually very good. It's like any other Canon professional camera. I actually like the smaller body on the R5 Mark II compared to my R3, for example. If you are still on an SLR system like a 5D, this is a much smaller body and lighter body, but it doesn't feel uncomfortable in the end, right? The grip is deep and it feels very comfortable to hold and use for a very long period of time, and I didn't have any issues with it. I do like there is a top display, just like the R3 and the older R5. One thing I've noticed with this camera that I don't quite like is the buttons. Not the positions of the buttons, because the positions are alright, but the size of the buttons. They are too small for my likings, and the dials are a little too small as well. I guess that's just a design choice by Canon, but you get used to them and they don't feel cheap at all, which is good. The viewfinder here is actually extremely good. It's amongst the best I've used. It's not as good as the R3, not in the sense that you think the resolution is there. I don't feel like I can see any more pixels than the R3, but the EVF cup isn't as deep as the R3, which means I get a little more glare when shooting outside, which is not a huge problem and you can get around it, but you should know that the size of the EVF is really large for a camera of this level. It's larger than anything else I've tried at this price point. It's not larger than the R3. It's comparable. It's a little smaller in my eyes, but still is very good for what you get. The refresh rate is up there. The resolution is very high as well. It's 5.7 million dots, I think. It's very bright, so no problems with the viewfinder at all. The screen on the back is very good. As usual for Canon, very bright screen, detailed, large enough, pretty good. No complaints about anything on the body, I guess. I do like there is the addition of a tally lamp at the front of the body, which means when I record video, I get a indication that I'm recording, just like the C70 which I'm recording on right now. I have an indication that means that I'm recording. We also finally get a full-size HDMI port, if that's something that is important to you. If you record video and you use an external monitor or recorder, then that's important, you know that. That's a welcome addition, and it's one that should have been there from the start. One other thing is the joystick on the back, the focus selector, I guess. It's a different shape. It feels different in the end than every other Canon SLR or mirrorless camera I've tried up until this point. The shape of it is different and the texture is different as well. It takes some getting used to. With my R3, it's the same as it's been with the 1DX, and it's the same that it's been in the 5D. This one is a little different. It takes some time to get used to, but it's fine. The memory card configuration here is as expected. You have one CF Express card Type B and one SD card slot, which is UHS 2 as well. Both cards are great. I like that there is CF Express on this, same as the R5 before, and same as my R3, same card configuration, and I do like it. I wish there was two CF Expresses in the body, rather than one SD and one CF Express, but that's just me. Some people would prefer only SD cards, some would prefer only CF Express, so I guess we have both. Now, for the sensor performance, the main event on any camera. In the R5 Mark II, there is a new sensor. It's a 45 megapixel backside illuminated, fully stacked sensor. It's really fast. It's got plenty of detail, plenty of dynamic range, and actually very good ISO performance for the amount of megapixels that you cram into it. I'm very impressed with this sensor. It's actually extremely fast. It's 45 megapixels, but compared to my R3, which is 24, is only slightly slower than my R3 sensor, which reads at around 5 milliseconds. This reads at about 6.5, 6.7 milliseconds. So it's not a huge difference. The R5 Mark II can now shoot 30 frames a second at full 14-bit RAW files, no hesitations, no downgrade really. There are no limitations from this body. You get what you pay for. 30 frames a second, 14-bit RAW files with the electronic shutters, no rolling shutter at all that I can see. Good dynamic range. Yes, it's slightly worse than the R3 or slightly worse than the R5 of yesteryear, but it's nothing that you would see in the real world. And if you use only electronic shutter, and you've used only electronic shutter on the older R5, then this is a major jump, because the older R5 did 12-bit RAW and this does 14-bit. So you gain a little more ISO performance, color tones, and dynamic range. But if you use only mechanical shutter, then you would see a difference at the lab. You wouldn't see that difference in the real world. So I guess I wouldn't worry about it, and I don't. The noise performance on this sensor is actually very good, especially considering it's a 45 megapixel sensor. Yes, there is noise, but when you consider that you are going to export the image at a lower resolution, most likely, than 45 megapixel. Let's say I will export this image at 24 megapixel or 20. Then I would lose a lot of that noise. It will be buried. I wouldn't worry about the noise performance. It's usable to my eyes until ISO 6400. You can use the images to 12,800, but I wouldn't push it much further than that. There is, if you use JPEGs, there is AI noise reduction built into the body. I wouldn't really use it. I don't care about it. I don't use JPEG at all. And if you want to compare the noise performance on the R5 Mark II in photo mode to my R3, the R3 is much better at controlling ISO noise, but it's a flagship camera, or at least it was a flagship camera until the R1. And the R1 is not being sold right now, so I can't even compare it in the mix. But the R3 is a lovely sensor. It has no noise up until 12,800, nothing major, and a lot of detail for a 24 megapixel sensor. The autofocus is really good, subject to another video, but I'm very happy with the performance on this camera, even compared to my R3. One other thing I've noticed with the R5 Mark II is color tonality and auto white balance. The color tones coming straight out of this camera are a little more natural to me than what I was getting with my R3 or what I was getting with a friend's R6 and R5. Is it something you can do in post? No, it's just a simple white balance correction. But the auto white balance here is superior to what was in the earlier R5 and what was in the R6 and R6 Mark II even. It's on par with my R3, which is saying a lot. Now let's talk about focusing. The autofocus system here is easily the best out of any camera other than my R3, and for the most part, 99% of the time, this one and the R3 autofocus system are on par, which is saying a lot about this camera, how good it is. And the R3 autofocus system is the best ever. There are no competitors that actually do it better. And the Sony A1 is good, but it's not as good as the R3 for many occasions. And the A9 III is very good, but still not as good in my opinion as the R3. The subject tracking on the R5 Mark II is extremely smart, and it locks on like a panicking child. It doesn't let go. No matter what you do, if you've half pressed the shutter button and it's locked, then you are locked. The focus is not going anywhere, and you are not going to miss any shots because of it. If you are shooting portraits like me, then you care about the eye detection and face detection autofocus, which is really good and maybe a little bit better than the R3 because it works from a smaller part of the frame, right? If there's a person in the frame and it's really far away and I'm shooting with 50mm lens, then the R3 will get that in focus, right? But it wouldn't lock on the eye. This one, it detects the eye even from a really far distance, which is really awesome. Even at f1.2, even at night, it works really great. Honestly, I have nothing bad to say about the autofocus system in the R5 Mark II. It's phenomenal and probably the best in the category. We can't talk about the R5 Mark II without talking about the video capabilities. And finally, on a Canon mirrorless camera, we get C-Log 2, the biggest upgrade in the R5 Mark II. It's the C-Log 2. You get more dynamic range, flatter profile, and a little bit more color to work with, and less noise. The R5 Mark II records in 4K up to 120 frames a second without any limitation in C-Log 2, 4:2 color, or 4:2 color, in whatever flavor of codec you would like, so it's really awesome for 4K. Now, if you want to go even above that, there's an 8K option here, and it can do 8K, 24, 30, or 60 frames a second, which is really cool, even in RAW, which is mind-boggling actually, and it doesn't overheat quickly like the R5 of yesteryear. What I really like about Canon cameras doing video is true DCI frame rates and true DCI resolutions. That means that if I shoot 4K DCI on this camera, I can get 17:9 aspect ratio, and it's 4096 by 2160, which is better resolution to work with than 3840 by 2160. It's 17:9. And you can also record true 24p frame rate, which means 24.00 rather than 23.98, which is a DCI standard. It also records in RAW while in 8K, full RAW. It also can do smaller file sizes in RAW in 4K, which is called SRAW. I didn't test it fully, but from what I've tested, it's phenomenal, and you don't lose any detail or dynamic range in the smaller RAW in the 4K mode, which is pretty good. Normally I don't shoot RAW, but if I wanted to and I wouldn't want the higher file sizes of 8K, then 4K RAW seems very good, and still 12-bit, and you still get all of the benefits in dynamic range and color ability to manipulate afterwards. From my testing of the R5 Mark II versus the R3 in video modes, if you don't record RAW, if it's just C-Log 2 in the R5 and C-Log 3 in the R3, then it's very comparable in all of the modes. The R3 seems a little sharper because it is downsampling to 4K in all the modes. This one doesn't. Dynamic range wise, the R5 is better. I did notice the highlights were cleaner and you add a little more detail. About 2/3 of a stop, maybe a stop at times. So yeah, and you get cleaner shadows as well. It's more comparable to a Canon C70, for example, than the other mirrorless camera options from Canon. And finally, in the video mode, we get waveforms and false color. These are great exposure tools. They are a part of the cinema line from Canon, and I'm happy to see it rolling down to a mirrorless camera that is consumer. If you want to see a detailed look in the video performance of the R5 Mark II versus, let's say, the C70 and the R3, leave a comment below and I will try to do it as fast as possible. Now we should dive into the menu system. The menu system in the R5 Mark II is essentially the same as any other Canon camera. If you've used them in the last couple of years, they are pretty intuitive. You can find everything you want, but I have some complaints. The option to use C-Log 2 is buried inside of a submenu which called CP, which means color profile. It's under that submenu, and you can go and change it to 709 or C-Log 3 or C-Log 2, but it's not in the picture profile menu, it's in other menus. So yes, it's like my C70, that is great, but if you are someone that didn't use a cinema camera from Canon, then you would find it a little hard to find. So maybe Canon should change that and give us a more intuitive look. Maybe in the frame rate and resolution menu, they can add the option to enable C-Log and which flavor of C-Log, and or go to Rec 709, and that would be a little nicer to use, I guess, for many people. Talking about a menu, there is a new custom button or custom, let's see what it's called, customizing controls on the camera, custom button menu I call it. It's a new green tab, saves you time. You don't have to dig through menus to get to customizing your buttons. It's a welcome addition yet again. I do wish there was a battery percentage on the top display rather than the line level in the battery that I have to guess or go into a sub-menu to see how much percentage I have. I wish there was just battery percentage on the top of the camera or in the viewfinder on the side. With all of the reviews about the R5 Mark II, I'm sure you've seen controversy about the battery. It's a new type of battery. It's called the LPE6P. I have no problem with it, right? I don't care that they switched from the older NH style batteries in the R5 and R6. It's a new generation of batteries for Canons, and they can provide more power for longer amounts of time, which is welcome. This is why you see longer recording times in video and why the camera doesn't overheat as quickly as before. It's a better technology. And yes, you can use this new battery on an older camera and you will get better recording times in video. I've seen videos on the R5C that people are using this new battery and getting double the recording time, which is awesome. So no, I don't get why people are as upset as they are with this new battery, because it's a new generation of camera. Then why do you care so much if it's a new battery? Yes, change your batteries. What you gonna do? It's a better battery design. Now, we have to get to my conclusions about the R5 Mark II. I feel like it's the best photo video hybrid on the market. It does photos phenomenally well. The autofocusing is amazing. The sensor is very good. It's really fast. You can do sports with it. You can do landscapes, you can do product photography and street and portraits, you can do videos, cinematic videos. In C-Log 2, you have slow motion in camera, amazing autofocus tracking in video also, and there are no real limitations for this camera. Don't get me wrong, there are other hybrid cameras on the market which are great, like the Sony A1 or the Canon R5, which I have right here, or the Sony A9 Mark III or the Nikon Z8 or Z9. They're all great, but I feel like the R5 does everything a little better rather than doing one thing a little better. And this camera is a jack of all trades, and it does do everything really well. My conclusion is this: the R5 Mark II is a phenomenal camera. It's a great bang for a buck camera, actually. Yes, it's expensive, but it's not as expensive as other competitors that are doing the same. This camera is versatile, it's fast, the image quality is superb, it does video very good, but at the end of the day, it's just a new camera. It won't make you a better photographer or a better filmmaker even. If you already own a camera and you are not limited by your camera, then you shouldn't upgrade to this. If this camera makes sense to you, if the upgrades in this camera are going to improve your workflow, then yes, this camera is a wonderful upgrade. But if not, then you understand the rest. You shouldn't upgrade only because it's new. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you've learned something in the process, then leave a like and comment down below what you will want to see in the next episodes about this camera or others or any other gear, for example, or even tutorials from me. I would be happy to make them just for you. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.